And we are live, the Ray Wenderlich podcast, and our special episode for WWDC 2018. I am Drew Freeman here with Jay Strong and our cast of RWPodcast Senior Illuminati. So I'm going to take time and introduce each person we got here. We are live. And I'm hearing an echo, and I have no idea why.
You sound good to me, Drew.
Do you have YouTube open in the background with volume on or something?
I have no idea. So
I totally did that.
That's going to be kind of tricky. So anyway, let me introduce the people we got here. I've got Evula. Yeah, I know. The problem is that maybe that could be it. Can I still hear you?
I can hear you.
Good. Yeah, I think I found it. It was that magical thing on Safari where it's like you've got audio coming through a different window, hit the little blue icon, and all of a sudden all the other audio goes away. That's great. My list of people who are here today, our Senior Illuminati, are far more knowledgeable about all tech things than I am. Jake Gunderson, a previous host of this show, is an iOS macOS developer with a focus on media and graphic technology, and he's currently a full-time senior developer at Crikey, an AR video creation platform. I look forward to hearing your input on AR and some of the stuff we saw there. How are you doing, Jake?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
I've got Richard Kreitz here. Richard is a longtime software developer with experience ranging from mainframe operating systems to iOS. And he's currently the RWPodcast iOS team lead. Hello, Richard.
Hey, Drew. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm a bit thrown from the whole day's exploration, but it'll be good to hear, especially your opinion on a lot of this stuff. Andy Obusek, right?
Obusek.
Obusek. I knew I was going to get at least one wrong. I knew I should have checked. Andy's an iOS engineer at Warner Brothers Digital Labs by day and RWPodcast's iOS pillar lead by night. He hasn't found a keyboard shortcut he doesn't love and looks to learn new ones as often as possible. So I'm hoping that Xcode's got your tastes wetted a bit.
Oh yeah, can't wait to dig in and see what's in there.
And finally, I've got Ray Fix, sometimes known on RWPodcast as Backtick Ray, because I guess we have another Ray somewhere from RWPodcast. Ray is a Swift enthusiast and serves as the iOS tutorials topic master. Though not attending WWDC in person this year, he has on 4 or 5 other occasions. And I was commenting just before the show that this would have been either 15 or 16 for me. But unfortunately, I have not been able to go since the lottery started in 12. When was everybody's last time out at the conference themselves? Jake?
You know, I've actually never attended the conference. I've been there a few times during the conference to meet people and stuff, but I've never actually gotten a ticket and attended the sessions.
Okay. Richard?
Same as Jake. Have never been.
Andy?
Yeah, for me, I've been once, and it was in 2014 when Swift was announced.
Yes. I think it was Janie who said Metal was the most impressive thing for about 5 minutes, and then they announced Swift, and everybody forgot about Metal for a while.
Yeah, Ray, that sounds about right.
Ray, you said that this is 5 years for you, but when was your last one?
Let's see, it was 2016.
2016
was my last one, but I think actually the Swift one, the 2014, I think has to have been the most amazing for me personally.
What was it like being there when they announced Swift? I mean, was the crowd in shock, or what was it like?
Yeah, pretty much slack-jawed. I was sitting next to this guy that had no reaction during the entire event. And they answered that, and I even saw this guy that was completely comatose the whole time suddenly look alive. So, yeah, everyone was just took everyone by big surprise.
Yeah, the thing I remember about that too is that there were no rumors about that. It came totally out of the blue. I mean, I try to stay in touch with Apple Apple Tech and rumors, and I don't think anyone had any clue that was happening.
I think that's the case with software. With software, that there are no rumors in advance, and it's kind of what happened this year too. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, right up until Apple leaks their own pictures of Xcode in dark mode the day before the con. That was sort of an interesting. It was, I just remember seeing the tweet saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, Mac OS 10.14 in dark mode," and it was just like, well, okay. Somewhere Steve is spinning in his grave for that leak.
Yeah. Well, and the other one too about the cross-platform framework or code, that while that didn't really get released today, like it was enough was leaked ahead of time that they actually took a significant time, in my opinion, to address that.
I think that's a really great place to start with this, is that Apple has not really, well, at least during the Jobs tenure, was not known for advanced releases of information. And during Tim, we've heard things like the Mac server that's going to come in the future, and they advanced tease things like the HomePod. But this is rather interesting. And there's been talk for a long time about, will there be Mac OS iOS convergence? But this really was a way of saying, we're working on it. It's here. Feel about basically getting that sort of whiff of the cake.
I know a lot of people want this, but I've been very reluctant to get excited about it. Partly because I've done a little bit of macOS development, and the user input paradigm is different, right? And so just moving a bunch of UI code over from an iOS project and kind of dumping it into some kind of container that translates clicks into taps, I'm like, I don't think that's going to be good. Like, I don't think that's going to be a great user experience. And so every time this has come up, and it's been coming up for years, I have kind of thought, I don't think this is real. And so today when they're like, no, it's real, I was like, oh, I hope it's good, because it would be easy to be kind of, I don't know. It would be easy for this to be junky, although in general, Apple, that's not Apple. So I presume if they're doing it, they'll do it right. But I don't know. That I'm still a little bit,
I can say I'm pleased that they picked a couple of their simple apps and said, well, we're going to take the apps and we'll do what the translation is. I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, I actually had a slightly different take on it, in that there's been so much jumping up and down about how there's going to be a new framework that's completely different from both UIKit and AppKit, and everybody's, this is what I'm looking forward to. This is what I'm going to be the most excited for. I've seen it on Slack, I've seen it on Twitter and stuff leading into this week, and I think it was more interesting that Craig's big fat no that he dropped on it to say that this is not where we're going, that AppKit is going to be there. AppKit is going to continue to be there. AppKit is going to continue to be what you program to on Mac OS. And we're going to find a way to make it easier to bring UIKit based apps into the AppKit environment. And the State of the Union made it a little more clear what it is they're doing. The problem is not that the problem from their point of view is that the substrates under AppKit and UIKit have diverged between the two systems, and they're trying to reintegrate them and make them more coherent between each other to give them the opportunity to do this. I think it's good if it creates more of an outlet for UIKit apps to run on the Mac. But I agree with Jake. There are still some interesting things that they're going to have to work out, and I won't be able to run the Mojave beta until NVIDIA releases drivers that will let me run the Mojave beta. So it may be a while, but it'll be interesting to see how well they've done with that translation of the tablet, the touch screen input paradigm and mapping it into the worlds of mice, trackpads, and keyboards.
It's interesting because iOS, being born out of the Darwin kernel, much like Mac OS was based out of that, they did comment during the State of the Union that there was the divergence that had occurred to allow them to make the modifications on Core, make the modifications on the metal layer for each of those platforms, and that they're trying to now reconverge those to not have those differences in the lower kernel. One of the things that I guess I geek about is I watch the version numbers for every release to see, you know, what is a kernel touch versus what is a major touch, etc. Because I find that I can see where the modifications are going, and I'm curious if they're looking to find a unified core layer completely, so that one core layer would compile up the line.
There's definitely areas where there's divergence that does not need to be there. So like some of the UI table view delegate methods versus the NS table view delegate methods are different, and it's pure legacy. There's no good reason for it. The collection view stuff is more unified because collection view existed when it was invented for iOS. So there's definitely chunks in there where you're like, yeah, this is just pure legacy. There's not a good reason. So there's definitely opportunities to make it easier. I do think if we get more really good Mac apps, I'm all for that. So if some kind of unified, UI paradigm, or even just making it easier is awesome, and that I am excited about. So yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings about it, as you can tell. So
the one thing people always commented to me was that when NSKit was made, or when AppKit was made, that you had the view structure. And then as they started working on UIKit, they realized, well, why don't we actually put the layers down underneath everything and build the views on top of the layers? And at which point they decided, well, now we've got to somehow back those layers into AppKit. And there's where you've got that huge disparate difference between the view system in the two OSs.
Yeah. A lot of iOS developers, when they first start doing Cocoa stuff, they're like, how come I can't just set a dot background color? Like what, like why is this so difficult? And it's, there's not a good reason. It's just legacy. So anyway.
And of course, the other big thing that we'll have to tack in when you take your iOS app over to the Mac is you're dealing with a menued system.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You've got a mouse instead of a finger, which you think, oh, they're pretty close, but it's like, not if you do them right, they're not. And then you've got the menu system, which is different. And then you've got, you got cursors. So you can do different things with the cursor. The cursor doesn't exist on iOS. And you might think, well, that's not a big deal. And on the one hand, it's not. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, really, really well-designed apps are very targeted to the platform they're on. And so any kind of cross-platform system we use in some level compromises a little bit the quality of the ultimate experience. And
I think the biggest difference for the contact point of view is the trackpad for the Mac is separate from the point of where you're touching. So the cursor is sort of that connection between where your finger is to where you intend that finger to be. Whereas when you're dealing with the touch system, your finger is touching what you want. There's a higher level of finger to point accuracy. Yeah. Whereas with the mouse or the trackpad, you're still estimating. And I think it's one of the things that separated the days of having a drawing tablet from using the stylus on an iPad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, plus panning, zooming, that's not going to work well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot to see, and it'll be interesting to see A, how it develops, and B, how much of it we get to see between now and WW19. So I think I'll agree. I think everybody here will probably agree with me that it was better that we talked about this after the State of the Union than the keynote, which seems every year to become less and less for the developers and more for the news bites. The keynote was surprisingly thin of information. Anybody?
I agree.
Yeah, it was very showy. That Lego app was cute.
As I have an 11-year-old, and all he's been talking about is when can he get the Lego app, and I told him that I'd see if they were hiring for 11-year-old developers, and that's how he could get his hands on it.
Did we ever get the Lego app they demoed last ARKit, last WWDC? Remember there was one where it's like you blow up the Batmobile and go inside the Batmobile and move it around, shrink it down. Do you guys remember this? Did we ever get that app?
Yeah.
They did release, or they didn't?
I never saw it, but that doesn't mean it. If it eventually came out, it was like not a ton of fanfare because I'd never heard about it again, and it looked cool.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how much of the demoware is vaporware, because I've seen other things that have been demoed at WWDC in past years that have taken sometimes 2 or 3 years to show up. Admittedly, OS 10 was one of them, so.
What did you guys think of the Measure app?
I think that everyone who's already made an app like that was like, "Oh no."
Yeah.
Well,
I was like, is that what we need Apple to do? Is take the one thing that does seem to be working fairly, like that seems like a pretty robust space in terms of ARKit, really well covered, and it's like Apple's going to come in and do it better. It's like, well that's
but
great.
That's like what they did with the flashlight, though. I mean,
That's true.
There were 9 million flashlight apps, and they said, okay,
Yeah.
let's put an end to this. We're just going to Sherlock them all. So,
Well, and the system flashlight I like better because it's just integrated. So I mean, I'm glad they did that. So yeah, I mean that's a good point. I was just like, partly I was just felt like, and I totally agree with the assessment that the thinness of the keynote, because I was like, I want to be excited, and there wasn't a ton of rumors, so I'm like, either there's not a lot to be excited about, or just they've kept it really secret this year. And there was definitely some stuff, but after the keynote, my overall feeling was like, and that's like seeing the Measure app and seeing some of the stuff in the keynote. I was like, I want more.
Yeah, I mean, and there were a lot of things they covered that I really think were for the public, not for the developers. Talking about the fact that they've been working on the performance on the older devices. I mean, that was basically a throwback to the Samsung commercial, which has been chewing on them for the battery throttling. Yeah. So, it's obvious that the keynote is there to comfort or console or to get the non-developers charged up. And I look at it now from things like this is something new, and you'll be able to do this with third-party apps, and you'll be able to do that with third-party apps. And that's where my mind is basically making my laundry list of, okay, so here are the new APIs and things I can plug into with my app. But they did feel like more extensions rather than new feature functionality.
Yeah.
So
let's
at least we
didn't have. Go ahead, Ray.
On that demo of the measuring app, did anyone notice that they put all those stickers on the suitcase to get a bunch of texture so that the demo went well? I guess I don't blame them.
Yeah, no, I didn't think of that, but you're totally right. That's a good call.
Yeah. And I will admit, the first thing I did with my, I have gone crazy. I have updated my iPhone 10 to the first beta. I ran the Measure app. And I measured my laptop screen, and initially that was great. And then I tried measuring the far wall of my room, basically from far corner to far corner, and it didn't have a sense of distance because it said that my laptop screen was 13 inches. Awesome. It said the width of my room was 27 inches. Not quite as awesome. And then after that, I couldn't get it to work again. So I have a feeling that whatever that ARKit 2 system is, it's not completely baked yet, as is the warning. And obviously, this is a podcast aimed at developers, but again, this stuff is not baked. And even we talk on our own boards about, no, don't pick up beta 1 yet, or go ahead and do beta 1.
So all this emphasis on augmented reality, I think it's cool and all, but there's part of me that's like, that says that, the iPhone, and I mean, there are a couple applications like the measuring app, for example, that are good, but, it's really screaming for glasses or, some.
I mean, they probably want to get it working before they release a dedicated device to AR. But I mean, you're right. When they were doing the Lego thing, it's like one hand on the iPad.
I think that's a fair observation, is that, if the AR itself isn't working, the device is just going to be a throwaway. But you do get that impression, especially when you see the AR view and you see somebody picking something up with 2 hands, and you realize, so I need 3 arms, 1 to hold the iPad and 2 arms to manipulate things. So yeah, at this point, it's still a held portal rather than the hands-free that we need. And that's still X years in the future, or maybe they'll contract in with one of the companies.
No, we'll hear about the glasses at some point in Johnny Ives' smooth voice with its sleek design and all that.
What we were after when we were just signing this was
exactly.
All right, so let's talk about something. We talked about the AR kit and some of the stuff that's coming in there. obviously, while we're down there, we can talk about some of the stuff that's happened in Metal. And one of the things that we've been discussing beforehand was that Metal is now potentially sending the end of life message for OpenGL and OpenCL. Which Richard, you had an observation about that. I want you to repeat.
I swear, and I'd have to go back and dig through Keynote text-to-speech or speech-to-text transcripts or whatnot, but I swear 2 or 3 years ago when they introduced Metal, or maybe it was 2014. Andy said it was 2014 when they did Swift, or was that 16? Whenever they announced Metal, I swear they said, this is all well and good, but it's really there for the engine developers and other stuff that you really want to still be using OpenGL and OpenCL as your interface for writing graphics, because writing for Metal is just too hard. I swear I didn't make that up. But maybe I did. But I swear that's what they said not 2 years ago or 3 years ago, whenever it was that they first released Metal 1. And okay, maybe Metal 2 makes it easier and whatnot, but it still seems like a very drastic change in direction.
Yeah, and again, deprecation is different than elimination. I mean, 32-bit on iOS was deprecated for years before they finally cut the thread. 32-bit on the Mac is finally being cut after Mojave. So as for how long OpenGL has before it actually ceases to be there, obviously, as I mentioned, if it's a 32-bit OpenGL, it'll stop working after this OS. But I guess because they're pushing Metal now not just as the graphic language, but as the accelerated processing language, especially to have for machine learning and everything else, maybe they are trying to simplify that language to be more diverse in its usage.
Well, it's certainly from the State of the Union when they were talking about it, and specifically we're talking about some of the other primitives that they'd added, the other shaders that they'd created simple APIs for. Clearly, there was a lot of that there that they'd put in for Core ML or for machine learning acceleration. But the whole GPU-driven command encoding and the ray tracing stuff that they've got, they're building primitives for. It's almost like it's a superstructure on top of Metal, at least my understanding of Metal. I don't profess to be a graphics person. Andy and I were talking about this earlier. Graphics and me are not the same thing, not even in the same universe. But it seems like from what he was describing that they are trying to make it more accessible to offload specific tasks that are common to machine learning training processes, or to ray tracing, or some of the other key things that happen in graphics. So maybe they are making it easier to program and go around the OpenGL and OpenCL interface.
They have that awesome debugger.
That's what I was just going to say. Some of the coolest stuff was some of the tools around Metal that really look awesome. So that was one of the things, and that we got a better look at in the State of the Union. So I think a lot of us had this experience where we watched the keynote and we were like, that's good stuff in there, but I was hoping for a little more. And then we saw some of the State of the Union, and they dug way into machine learning, and they dug way into some of the tools in Xcode and some stuff. And then I actually was pretty pumped up after that. I was like, okay, I'm super excited about some of the opportunities for machine learning. They have a new framework platform, system ML. Where you can actually train models, and you can use the well-trained models for generic image detection, and then you kind of tag your image detection feature on the end of the chain. And what that means is you have a much smaller model. You can train it on a desktop machine. You don't need a giant cloud platform to train it. And then you can, in Xcode, you can develop your own image detection models, what looked like relatively easy. That I'm super excited about. That was one of those things where I was like, okay, this is why I get all excited. This is like Christmas morning. Why WWDC often feels like Christmas morning to me. That's what I was looking for. So I was super excited about that.
I would say that the tools above anything else, and it was interesting because Xcode got practically no airtime during the keynote, but it really got to shine during the State of the Union with the debugging, with some of the UX changes to Xcode, and we can skip over dark mode because dark mode's sort of nifty unless you were raised on a black CRT with white lettering on it way back when.
I'm really looking forward to dark mode personally. I'm sick of but yeah.
But some of the things that were brought in, I remember watching on our internal board when they had the what was it, the Xcode overscroll, which is the silliest thing in the world, but it's for all of us who have always put a 30 or 40 blank lines at the bottom of a text file just so we can see it off the bottom of the window. But some of the stuff in instruments, especially with the new baked instruments, the user designed instruments, are outstanding. Instruments continues to just grow in leaps and bounds.
Yeah, the instrument stuff with the OS log and the OS signpost stuff actually looked really interesting, and it made sense. I was in between the two things. I was scanning the release notes for Xcode 10, and they were talking about they were removing ptrace and dtrace support from Xcode and from the simulator. And I'm like, okay, well, that might or might not be a problem. I don't really know yet. And mentioning that they were switching to OS log and OS signpost, and seeing some of the things you can do with it in instruments, like, okay, this is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, I really wish I'm looking forward to seeing the session on signposts, because seeing what they had with the networking calls and being able to say that, well, these networking calls were being called repeatedly, so that there was a way to actually try to siphon that data down for performance, well, was quite impressive. The Git has been expanded to some of the other Git services that many of us use. I have used Bitbucket a ton, so that was a pleasant surprise. What was it? Git pull now supporting Rebase. The parallel testing. Comments on that?
I'm personally a huge testing advocate, so that looked fantastic. I almost directly see connection there with Apple acquiring Buddy Build. That's something, they may have built just to integrate with Buddy Builds running tests in the cloud. Another feature related to testing I was pretty excited to see was a checkbox in your project settings allow you to randomize test order. Mm-hmm. So for as long as testing's been in Xcode, like, you have not been able to control that. And I think it may even run tests by alphabetical order, but as your test bed grows, it's really easy to introduce bugs into your test bed because of like setup stuff that isn't torn down. And so randomizing your test order will help surface and like introduce a lot of repeatability in your test execution.
And the code coverage now being able to be limited to just specific sections rather than everything else. I know I've had issues with the code coverage where the code coverage will cover the code plus a pod plus the tests. And I'm like, I don't need code coverage on all of that. So it's good to see that getting some refinement there. So we talked briefly about the machine learning. What was it? ML Create.
ML Create.
ML Create. And it looks like, from what I'm seeing, you can do image and you can do natural language, but they've also said now for Core ML2 that there's also your own models.
Right, they have standard regressors, it looks like. So like a linear regression, or multiple linear regression, something like that. You can actually, there's a new data table. And a lot of this stuff looks like it's, using good Swift semantics or Swift idioms like value types. Like there's this data table that you can pull in a CSV file of numbers and say, hey, I want to predict this column of numbers, and it'll sort of automatically figure out, how to predict that stuff from new inputs, which looks really cool.
Yeah, because I can figure there's a lot of data for machine learning that is not simply recognize this picture or interpret this string of words. There's plenty of the biomedical research, for example, where you're basically taking some form of chemical information and trying to say, okay, where does that occur? Completely out of my field, so I'm just sort of pulling that out of my beard.
Yeah, so like ML classifier, ML regressor, these are new types, actually enumerations in the new Create ML framework that look interesting.
They mentioned in the State of the Union that you had the two main classifiers, the natural language and the vision stuff, where they've built up a lot of the stuff around it, but they also provided the way to do all of the standard ML algorithms like linear regression or boosted tree and a bunch of other things there that work better for different data sets, and that apparently is all in there as well. So there's a lot of opportunity for real in what they've built in that.
Yeah, so like I'm just actually looking at the document right now. The ML regressor, you can do linear, decision tree, boosted tree, or random forest as different strategies.
And if you don't know what, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug, if none of those terms make any sense to you, which they don't to me or didn't to me, there is a tutorial on the site written by Michael Kunnigan, and I probably screwed up his last name. If you go search for, which one was his? His was the scikit-learn tutorial. If you search for scikit-learn, you'll find a tutorial that he wrote where he covers some of that in enough detail that it actually gives you a passing knowledge of what the words actually mean.
So and there are going to be more on the way.
So I can finally write my poker predictor program.
Right.
All right. So let's talk about some of the security stuff that's been added in, because we go back to when the sandbox showed up, but they continue to really work on what they're locking down. A couple of things that I found interesting. Obviously, the fingerprinting of the device to try to obfuscate making devices not appear similar. But where that also comes in is what we have access to as developers, and they're shutting down now. Not shutting down, but now you're getting more of a user end request for more services. What was it? The camera and the microphone now, but also there is the notarization service, and I was curious what everyone's reaction to that was. And this is what happens when I get all iOS guys and ask a question about the Mac OS.
Well, overall trend, I think that Jake kind of mentioned earlier is just, I'm enthusiastic to see that certain things were addressed on the Mac ecosystem. One, that they're thinking ahead towards that new framework for building UI that might be a little appeal to a broader audience of iOS developers. 2, an updated App Store, and then 3, like security settings within that, and then also from what I could understand in the notary service, it's kind of like a way to have your app certified by Apple without actually being in the App Store. Is that how you guys interpreted that?
Yeah,
with a finer grain control than just your developer ID, which so it's almost like a registry of approved apps, and a way to pull certain ones or to revoke certain ones without killing your whole the entirety of everything you've released.
Yeah, it was interesting because one of the things that I noticed was the announcement that Bare Bones' BB Edit would be moving to the App Store. And one of the reasons that I always thought that BB Edit was off the App Store was because it was an app that installed tools once it was installed. And my understanding, at least a while ago, because I haven't done a Mac app in a while, was that one of the things that you were precluded from doing was installing tools, unless you were Xcode. So I don't know whether or not either they've changed that policy or whether or not maybe it is going to change, but it was just interesting to more things were moving to the App Store there. So obviously I'm going to have to move back to iOS technologies to get people going. So let's talk about some of the Siri additions and how that affects third-party applications. The actions, the suggestions, the shortcuts. I know I heard people go, it's Automator and other things like that.
So the shortcut thing, am I right that they hired the people around that app Workflow or whatever? There was a third-party app where you could do all kinds of. Did an Apple hired those guys? Is that right?
He acquired the.
Okay.
They acquired the company.
So I wondered. I mean, I didn't use Workflow a ton, but like I it seemed like a really good tool. And so I was hoping that we would see something like that. And I'm hoping that, like, I was pretty excited about shortcuts. It looked pretty cool. And that's one of those things where you really got to get your hands on it to be like, is this going to be the tool I want it to be? But I'm really hoping it is, because I was really excited. I think it looked really cool. And the Siri integration with it looked pretty cool. I don't use Siri a ton, but that might change that for me. So I was quite happy about that particular part of the keynote.
I thought it became more interesting when they kind of, as a throwaway line in the State of the Union, pointed out that if you put shortcut support into your app, that suddenly the shortcut worked on your HomePod without even having to have your phone nearby. It's like, okay, that actually is kind of cool. So
there's a lot of, I mean, they did talk in the State of the Union about the fact that the iCloud sync between the different platforms is where there's a greater amount of focus now. And I know a lot of the questions that came up were, how many of these things are peer-to-peer? How many of these things are occurring over the net? How many of these things are occurring via iCloud? And I haven't noticed, but I know some of you have been looking into the APIs. Has there been any expansion in the iCloud APIs as far as anyone's seen? Nobody's looked at that yet?
Nothing jumped out at me in the titles of the sessions either.
Yeah, there was the one mention that they were kind of using it as the backbone, but I didn't see anything that made me think that I should even go looking for a session.
Okay. So at this point, has everybody looked at the session list that's coming up for this week?
Yep.
Is there any session in general that really you think is worth checking for developers, or which sessions you think really reach out and say these are ones you don't want to miss? Because I think it's a good idea that we can have some general pointers of, yeah, this is where you want to focus initially.
Well, kind of like the big session tomorrow is what's new in Cocoa Touch, and I consider that one like a don't miss watch as soon as possible, because that'll even give you some hints as to like what do you need to update in your app just to have it kind of look iOS 12 native when that launches.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're always going to start with the what's news, but of the technologies, are there any of those that really seemed of great interest? As everybody on the team is currently looking down, going, which one was that?
Well, I'm being sort of the Swift enthusiast here. There's a lot of interesting looking Swift sessions that I'm going to attend on generics, optimizing collections, just what's new in Swift 4.2. Those are all interesting to me, and hearing the engineers' take on that stuff.
I guess I should digress that. I guess it wasn't a surprise that Swift 5 is not ready at this time. It'd be obvious because it's a little more open. Swift is not one of those technologies that Apple can really hide. It's open. I know there were a lot of people who were testing Swift 4 before Apple even made mention of it. I think they pretty much said that Swift 5, the ABI is there. They also talked about, well, you're the Swift expert. Can you capsulize some of the stuff that you got out of what they're looking at for Swift 5?
Well, I think the big thing, as you already mentioned, is the ABI stability. And in fact, if we go back to the Marzipan project, which is that mix of UI kit with app kit, I think that is hinging on ABI stability. Until Apple has ABI stability, they're not going to ship a Swift-only framework, this new UI framework, until they have that. So that's what's really sort of gating that whole process, I think. So Swift 4.2 is a stepping stone to get us the changes in the standard library that we need in order to get to the next step where it's locked down. They can just have a binary for the standard library on the device, and then they can start releasing closed source frameworks that are written in Swift, like Marzipan.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other comments on Swift?
There's a lot of good stuff that they've added in 4.2, particularly with respect to generics and to conditional conformance of protocols, which are going to really ease some of the things that we've been banging our heads against, even in 4.0 and 4.1. So,
can you give a little information about the conditional conformance?
Not without a whiteboard and whatnot. There actually is a very good description of a couple of the things that they've done with conditional conformance in the release notes for Xcode 10. It'll also be covered in an article that'll be published on the website in the next couple of weeks.
And
I'll do it as a plug again.
Good teaser.
We keep playing. Obviously, all of this stuff will be showing up in relatively short order on the site in different forms as things get done and matured. I mean, we are looking at beta 1 at this point, and there's probably many things in there that may not actually make it to the end of the road at this point. Let's see what else.
I'm excited about the hashable framework personally.
Yeah, what are you excited about for it?
Well, that you can so it's taking on sort of more of a like encodable, where you hash to a hasher, and that hasher can have some well-known hash algorithm like a city hash, or some more cryptographically secure hash. So something with like really robust and measured and well understood characteristics. Whereas, sort of the way hashing works right now in iOS is fly by the seat of your pants hashing, where you XOR a couple things together and hope it all works out. But I think it's a lot more going to be, that whole framework will be a lot more robust and usable in a lot more domains other than iOS, which is kind of interesting.
Right. It'll be good in and of itself, but it also, the bigger thing that I think that it enables is compiler generated conformance with hashable and equatable. The same way that you can have compiler generated conformance for codable in Swift 4. 4.2 will give us compiler generated conformance for hashable and equatable in a lot of cases, and eliminate a ton of boilerplate code that people have to write.
What else did you mention about the generics had been expanded a bit for this?
Yeah, there was, I don't remember what the restriction was, but what's making it easier, it's making it easier for you to do conditional conformance to, for example, hashable or equatable, where you can say you have your own type and you say, there's two things that they've changed. One is that the conformances can now be declared in an extension. 4.0 and 4.1, the conformance has to be declared in the main class or the main struct, or the compiler won't generate it for you. Now you can declare it in an extension, which is the way we like to structure source code in the first place. So you can declare a class, and then you can say extension of that, or struct, it doesn't matter. Declare a type, and then you say extension of that type conforms to equatable or conforms to hashable, where the generic inside it conforms to hashable with an empty implementation, just open brace, close brace, and the compiler does all the work for you, which is really quite nice.
You can have an array as the key of a dictionary now. That's kind of mind-blowing to me, but not that you should do that.
I was about to say, I'm trying to just come up with an idea of why, but I mean,
I don't think there's a good idea for why, but you can.
Well, okay, so
something like a true developer.
Imagine that you have an array of optional types. You cannot use with the old way, before conditional conformance, you couldn't ask if those two things were equal, because an array was not equatable before, even though the optional was equatable. Optional of an equatable type was equatable, but the array of the optional of the equatable type was not equatable. So it's just a long way of saying, things that you thought should have worked before are now going to just work. You can ask if two arrays of optional integers are equal or not, and it'll work, as opposed to giving you a compiler error. So that's nice.
I want to touch on another one or two of the more keynote-ish type features that we saw from iOS. The password extensions that have been added in. It's interesting because there were a lot of things that people looked at and said, well, there's a company who's going to be upset that their stuff has been taken down, and there's another company. But then the password extensions almost look like, well, no, companies like 1Password, they're going to be doing just fine because there's a way to attach to it. So did anybody have any special note from the new hard passwords, password autofill, etc.? Just general reactions to that.
Can somebody explain that to me real quick? Because when I was watching, I kind of didn't quite understand the feature. So is anyone willing to just explain it to me? I think our listeners might, it might help them too.
Is there anybody who got a good feel for what it is?
It provides a clean way through the operating system to hook in something like 1Password as your password manager. So if you're a lot of apps that I use, actually, because I use 1Password, have a button on there that has the 1Password logo, but it's specific to the app to allow you to pull your password for login from 1Password. They introduced last year in iOS 11 the ability to associate your app with a website and with the credentials for a website, so you could get the login automatically if your password and username were stored in the keychain in iOS. The impression I got was that this extension now allows you to connect not only the keychain but a third-party password manager like 1Password or any of the others that's one of your favorites.
I was rather surprised at the general. I was surprised at the general statement that you could now just ask Siri for your password on a specific site. But then again, there's that general feeling of, well, once you have authenticated to your device, now you basically have access to all that stuff. But it just seemed like with all of the raised security, that just felt almost as if it was lowering security in some ways. Now there's a whole bunch of,
if you share your iPhone with a kid or something.
Well, I think Apple's always been of the mentality of one device per person. Apple's really never given me an impression, with the exception of possibly the Classroom app, which is not meant to really take your iPad to its full usage. But I really consider that Apple's always viewed it as one device per person. I've never seen them try to multi-use or even have the ability to do that. I'd hoped when they started doing things like pushing your desktop to the cloud, that was a suggestion that maybe that might be possible. But again, it always seems to be one device, one person per device. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
What did you guys? Sorry if you don't want to pursue this, just let me know. But what did you guys think of the digital life? Some of the like timers and like limit setting, some of that stuff.
Oh, I want to pursue that. That's what I was going to ask about next. So, I'm curious how much of that data is just internal for their tracking and your usage as a customer, or how much we might be able to use that. My guess is going to be that is off limits data as personal data, because it's always been a question that it's like, I'd like to know if an app is on your system. Well, no, I just basically throw a link and pray. So do you think that data is something that, first of all, developers might have access to, or do you pretty much feel that that's sandbox personal?
I would be very surprised if they gave us access to it.
Very surprised.
See, I view it from the point of, I like the fact that they talked about, for once on iOS, the parental idea. One of the things I felt iOS has always fallen a little behind on is parental control. And one of the companies that, of course, was brought up when they talked about this kind of monitoring was, I think, Circle, which Disney has their name on, but I think Circle is its own company that Disney just sort of attaches their name to, which is a usage app. There are a few others. I think Unglued is another one. And I'm going through the list because with an 11-year-old, I have to go through this list of monitoring. But it seems like either through through some form of API or possibly through device management. Maybe there'd be some kind of access, so that would be more automatable through an external app.
Yeah, I didn't get a feel for how it is they're doing it at all. And doing it through device management would potentially expose data that they may not want exposed, because I don't think they want to expose this level of information to, say, an employer.
But then, yeah, and that's where device management comes in, is where maybe the employer wants to leverage this to say, I need to be able to monitor when are they using the devices for what purpose. I mean, I'm not from that personal world where I want my manager or my company knowing what I'm using my device for, but I can see the corporate reason behind it. I mean, that's where the original Outlook profiles came from, where Outlook could say, I need to block these apps or that app for these employees, and sometimes it was a security issue or a maintaining parity issue kind of thing.
All right. What I'll be interested to see with respect to the whole screen time, the parental side of the screen time thing, not where you're using it to manage your own behavior, but where you're trying to manage your kids' behavior. I'll be interested to see if they do a better job of fixing it so that you can deintegrate that as the kids grow older. Because the Mac OS has had parental controls in it for as long as I've been using it, and they worked just fine when my son was 4 years old, and when he got to be 11 years old, it was in the way, and moving it out of the way proved to be far more difficult than one would have liked. So I'm hoping that what they've done with this, because as kids grow older, you're going to need to move out of the way, that they've made it easier to make that happen.
And for developers, this is a good reason to actually shove an early beta onto your kid's device, because, and I always point this out to every company I work for, the reason to jump on the betas early is because this is the time that your radars may actually get these bugs fixed. Apple is willing to see in the early betas, we didn't think of this, or this isn't quite the way it's supposed to go. But if you start testing your commercial apps around beta 7 of 8, not knowing that there's going to be 8, but if you start testing at beta 7 of 8 and you find out, oh no, the API has broken me, they're late, they're looking to close things up, you probably will be broken upon release. So finding these silly keynote features and saying, okay, these don't work now, this is the best time to get those radars in. And as a developer, having access to radar for radar's sake, and as a third-party developer, we may all have our own opinions of our success stories with radar, but I agree that I'd like to see how the parental management works and try some use cases, because as mentioned, I have a preteen and I am going through those situations. For example, you talked about the Mac parental controls. My son has obviously adopted things like Minecraft, but once we started dealing with Java, the Java application or running apps that are Java and parental controls don't really like to see eye to eye. So there are those strange cases of runtime environment versus app. So, were there any other things? Because any topics you guys want to bring up, we absolutely will be glad to throw around today.
Well, we didn't really talk about any of the notification changes.
Okay. So I like I said, I've installed iOS 12, and I'll give you the example that I have is Facebook Messenger, and I have one group chat on Facebook Messenger that is noise. It's got a noise to signal ratio, and the first thing I noticed was that I got one notification that 12 notifications had come in. I'll tell you right off the bat, that's a good thing. I'm pleased with that. I did not necessarily pay as much attention as to what the tech is underneath that they're adding for notifications. Did anybody focus on some of those things?
The tech underneath, I agree with you, not so much. I am, as a user perspective, though, looking forward to the Do Not Disturb at Bedtime feature. because I've definitely experienced what they were talking about on stage there, where, you know, I look at my clock, my phone is my clock in the middle of the night, and I see like however many push notifications, and I'm immediately pulled back into, oh, you know, what's the news here? Who got elected president?
You know, I don't think I'll be as happy with notifications turned off at bedtime, but I know that my spouse will, because it annoys her when I get the notifications at bedtime.
Yeah. Also adding that, it seemed kind of a very lifestyle type of thing. Like they're saying, or I don't know, it just seemed like an advertisement for the iPhone, and that the iPhone respects your time, it makes you a more productive person. It honestly wasn't a bad idea to show that.
Well, again, the keynote is really for the consumers more than the developers. And I mean, there was so much focus on the health and the fitness, where did anybody know? So is there any real fitness API additions? I mean, there's fitness algorithmic things that have been added. I know they added the yoga, and they've added competitions, but I didn't necessarily notice whether or not any actual APIs had been added into any of this.
Yeah, there's that new framework, Gym Kit, which I think allows you to pair your watch with equipment in the gym.
Yeah, that was introduced last year. It's just there hasn't been a wide adoption of it.
Well, they mentioned it on stage, and then I was like, "Is there a session for this?" I couldn't find it, and then it looks. I wonder if it's a vendor facing thing, where it's like if you make treadmills and bikes and stuff, then you've heard of it. But if you're just the average, that's not for iOS developers necessarily. I don't know if that's true, but I wonder if that's
it really does sound like it comes from the MFI world of,
yeah.
If you don't need that specific stuff. And yes, I realize by even saying the letters MFI, somebody from Apple's going, shh, you don't talk about MFI.
Well, it did make me, I mean, the watch kits section, I had a watch for a while, and then I just didn't use it enough. And so I haven't had one for a while, but I was like, oh, I hike. They added hiking. So maybe I should go get it. It did make me for a minute think, maybe I need to watch again. Maybe
there is a session tomorrow at 3:00 on HealthKit, by the way.
I mean, the feature, if the feature I would want is that if I was an app builder working with an exercise app like Strava or Map My Run or Runkeeper, and I had a watch, I could pair that with the treadmill at the gym or the stationary bike, and have it feed the data back into the app to track as a workout more than just a timed manual created thing.
So maybe there are parts of GymKit.
Well, that's the question, right? The interface layer there, is that something that any BLE like enabled device could do, or does the hardware have to support GymKit? Because I totally agree. I would go to a different gym if I could go to a gym that would integrate with my.
That's a huge missing piece from all those apps, right? Is like connecting to the gym equipment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I remember GymKit being introduced last year, and I really remember them showing the way that you could actually log into that equipment and have a running profile on it, and it would monitor with the devices if you had a stationary bicycle or a rowing machine or the like, that it would then feed the data back into the watch. But yeah, it strikes me as one of those extensible hardware frameworks, again, etc. Which reminds me, I know there was mention, and I unfortunately had stepped out of the room, for CarPlay getting some love this year. Did anybody catch what that was?
Yes, my son was particularly excited about it. Third-party navigation apps are integrated with CarPlay now, so you can use Waze instead of Apple Maps.
Yay.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm a Waze user, so. And let's see. So Stock Apps has been updated. I'm going through my notes. Stock Apps, News App.
I actually going to go back to early in the keynote. I actually wasn't initially so impressed by it, but then I started to see uses for it. The new USDZ file format for the AR, the rendered AR file shared session, whatever it is they want to call it. Some of the opportunities there for mixed media and web media going forward actually looks really interesting. I mean, it's a big gee whiz, but it looks really interesting.
There's actually, I looked up, they have a specification, the USDZ file format specification on the Pixar site for it. I haven't dug into it too.
Yeah. The AR stuff, I mean, I feel like between some of the machine learning and the 3D object detection, the number of sessions on AR in the schedule, and just the amount of time they spend on a keynote, it's clear that AR is a big deal for Apple. And I'm interested in this because I work for a company that we have an AR video web. That's what we're doing. But I'm excited about it, but I also am feeling like, I feel like there's still not a real killer feature for this technology yet. And so when they first announced ARKit, I was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. I couldn't wait until, iOS 11 dropped and we'd see all these ARKit apps. And it felt like we got a bunch of measuring tools and some like games that I'm like, I don't know, is this better in AR? I don't know if it's better, but how do you guys feel about this? Cause I still feel like I'm still waiting for this reveal of like, well, this is how this technology is really going to really make a big impact in my life. And I'm still waiting for that.
Well,
this is the guy working at the AR company.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, like we've got our theory on it, but I don't know.
I think I know where it's going to end up. I think I know where some of the killer apps are going to end up being 5 years from now. And it's a mix of both AR and VR, but you look at it by combining that technology with game development technology, the technology you would use to build Fortnite or you pick it, and turn that into training tools, whether it's training tools for salespeople, whether it's training tools for surgeons, being able to use AR and VR mixed in. But it goes back to the conversation we were having earlier. It's not going to work if you're holding your iPad up in front of your face. But the concept with the appropriate hardware gives you the opportunity to train things to pre-visualize a surgery or to pre-visualize a repair operation in a hazardous environment, or to pre-visualize how you're going to put out a fire. I mean, you can use that to train in situations where it's going to be difficult to do it live, or it's going to be harder or more risky to do it live. And I think that's where the technology is going to end up showing its real value. I just don't think we're quite there yet in the combination of the ability of the technology and the availability of the hardware to make it useful. Because again, you hold an iPad up in front of your face, you're not also going to be practicing the skills for, doing a dissection or putting a fire out or.
Yeah, I often think of the science fiction where I'll see a science fiction movie where a doctor is doing some kind of surgical thing, and there's a viewing plate, and the actual data of what he's seeing in the operation area is a 3D render of what the cameras are picking up inside the surgical area. But again, I agree that right now the viewport is the problem. The viewport makes it harder for us to separate. You've got either in the iPhone a very small viewport, which I guess is good for things like HUDs or maps or photographs. You've got the iPad, which is good for a couple of games. But once you're looking at really immersive style AR, where you can get a good view of things that you're looking at, there's got to be some new form of in-between point.
Mm-hmm. And ways to interact with it too, because if it's like on your eyes the way a Vive is, you can't touch it. You'll need something else.
Well, interestingly, there is work going with the Vive and the Oculus, particularly the Oculus, in labs and universities in game development programs, where they're working on exactly that kind of thing, including, for example, the training a surgeon. I mean, I know for a fact that's one that's being worked on.
But now with the Vive and the Oculus, now you're moving out of AR into full VR because you're losing the outside world. And it surprised me that while Apple has embraced AR, and I like the fact and how they've embraced AR, that they haven't spoken very much about VR. They've kind of been very quiet on it. And you think, especially now with all the eGPUs that you can push into the device, that you should. And I remember them talking about getting some of these connections with these things last year, but it seems to have fallen very quiet in the meantime.
Yeah, I think it's there's just not quite yet a convergence of all of the technologies and all of the both hardware and software. They're just not quite ready to be integrated yet. And Apple is nothing if not, they don't want to show things with rough edges. They want it to be well integrated.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. I suppose at this point I should remind people we are on YouTube group chat. There, feel free to press the like button. I've always wanted to say that in a video. This episode, just to interrupt, we will be editing it down for removing the long pauses and trying to figure out what we're discussing. And we will be releasing this in a few weeks as a podcast episode, which will sort of draw some of the information, some of the best information together. And when that's released, it'll also be on the RayWenderlich.com website as one of the podcast episode pages, and there'll also be an area for forum comments as well. As we get through this, let me ask each of you one at a time something that absolutely stood out for you and something that absolutely fell flat. So that one thing that you said, oh my God, this, and it can be from the State of the Union or the keynote, and then that one moment of, I see no purpose in this whatsoever. And then I guess we can each take turns saying, well, no, I see this, or no, I didn't like that. So let me start. Richard, I'm going to leave you for last on this one because I think I see you smirking already. Andy, did you have a standout moment from today's information?
Oh, man. Going through my list of notes right now.
And the rest of you can be looking through your notes because you know I'm coming to you next.
Yeah, you're putting me on the spot here. So, I mean, I'll give this. I don't know if this is the biggest moment for me, but one that I did jot down that was kind of mind-blowing, if they can pull it off, is the change coming on Apple TV where there is no sign-on, and that if they can just magically from something over my internet connection detect what I can get access to, and then make that all available on my Apple TV, I would love that because I absolutely hate my cable box. And I also hate a lot about Apple TV in terms of trying to figure out which apps I have access to, which apps I've used my parents' credentials for, and versus, apps that just simply aren't going to have the content I'm looking for.
I'd had a problem with having business internet out of my household, and I coupled it all, my provider Verizon, and I found out that my Verizon business didn't cover me being able to actually authorize any of the apps, so I had to chisel off my television to be separate from my package so that I had residential television to be able to authorize things. So the one system will be interesting. Admittedly, also with that was the fact that they said, so we've got Charter, and that leaves it's sort of like Apple Pay, where it's like, we've got these three banks. So I think that it'll be interesting to see how that list ramps up over time. But I agree that being able to detect where you are on whose network for your uplink would be astounding.
Well, be aware that Charter absorbed Time Warner about a year ago, so that's
true.
Much bigger than it sounds.
And then the feature that fell flat on its face for me was the walkie-talkie feature available coming in the watch, because
Nokia lives.
Yeah, or the Voxer app, if you guys have ever tried that. But
yeah,
I think I don't know, I wasn't excited by it at all, and I think like watch is slow enough that like, is anybody really going to use that?
Yeah, it's hard for me because I deal with accessibility. My spouse being, for the most part, deaf. One of the draws of the watch was the haptic responses, and especially being able to get a message from her and then speak the message back and have the text go out to her. That was enough for me. I didn't need to actually throw the voice in as well. I don't know if it's really any much of added, but I guess some people, it's if you're outside with the watch. I mean, I haven't heard how good the audio quality off the watch is on a phone call. I haven't done that. How has anybody else done a phone call off the phone? We got one thumb down. So two. So they keep, but then again, they're saying crystal clear audio. They're probably talking the Watch 3 and looking forward to the Watch 4. And admittedly, I'm on a Watch 1.
And it's not very loud either.
No, it's not.
So it kind of sounds like a walkie-talkie.
It surprised me though, after 30 years of Apple ownership, and I've owned just about every Apple product under the sun. The watch was actually the first one that I bought Rev 1 version 1 on the first day. Everything else I've always waited to let that thing shake out. But I bought the watch and it's still version 1, and I still like it and I use it. I'm looking forward to some of this, so yeah, I'll try it, see what I think. All right, who's next up? Jake, did something really stand out for you?
I think, yeah. So the honest answer is the thing I mentioned before with the machine learning, the ability to train your own models using the
ML Create.
Yeah, the ML Create, and the ability to kind of piggyback on the existing image recognition models that have already been trained. I'm super excited just to play with. I don't have a specific application in mind. I just think, oh, you could do all kinds of thin stuff with that. So that was probably the thing that got me the most excited. Fell flat. I mean, I don't know, like there's a lot of stuff where I'm just like, I guess it's fine, but who cares? Like, you know, a lot of the when they went through the 4 apps, like the voice memos, the stocks app, the other one, I was just kind of like, that all felt to me like this means they don't have anything better to put in this time, because this really doesn't need to be in the keynote. And maybe that's just me. Maybe I just don't care about those particular apps, but that for me, I was like, I guess a redesign is due, but like, I don't need to hear about this at the keynote. So
I can look at that and think that those 4 apps are the really quiet ones off to the side, and it made it easy for them to say, okay, these are the 4 most really neglected apps, so we can use those as the abused apps to try on the Marzipan project. And I think that's where the relevance came in, was you know, these apps, not a lot of people care about them, so maybe they won't get a lot of love or use while we're testing them on the Mac to see how this project is going.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, the Marzipan component is a lot more interesting than just the fact that like we have a new stocks app. Like, okay,
yeah, I might play with the apps more with that, with that conscious feeling of I'm actually using an iOS app.
Does this create a good? Yeah.
They seem to marvel over the fact that there was news alongside the stock.
Yeah. Yeah, all that stuff. I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, it was just Jay, I'm going to put you on it too. Did you have something that really stood out to you and just really whet your appetite?
Oh, geez. I didn't know that you were going to ask me. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess the fitness stuff is interesting, but I've had a Fitbit, and while it's fun for a week, it's not really something that I see people using enough to have competitions. But I really like the third-party integration, the fact that she could work on her Yelp reservation without having to open the Yelp app. That's really convenient. That saves time. And the performance stuff, I think, was probably the most exciting for me as someone who's using an iPhone 6.
All right. Anything that you just looked at and could have done without?
Probably the competitions on the watch, walkie-talkie, like you guys said, and like we discussed, still kind of underwhelmed by the augmented reality, but I feel like this is a stepping stone towards glasses or something more useful in the future. So I understand why they're pushing it.
Okay, back to Gray.
Okay, well, I really like that sort of inspirational video that they had at the end of the keynote, where people were using their abilities to solve problems, and I found that quite inspirational. I also found the design awards, watching those are always super inspirational to watch what people have done with that stuff.
I haven't seen them yet, so no spoilers.
Okay, I won't, but there's a bunch of great apps out there.
I usually wind up buying a whole bunch after I see the design awards.
Yep.
Right. Another thing that was great that I'll mention was going back to the vision thing. There's or machine augmented reality vision thing is you have the ability now to train a point cloud and then be able to recognize that point cloud in some scene and then trigger based on that. Not exactly sure why that's great, but like if you're doing a museum exhibit and had a statue that you wanted to, or landmarks like that you wanted to bring out, I guess for the games and for doing the persistence and stuff, that's all going to be super important if AR is ever going to catch hold. I guess that's it for that. What I continue to be disappointed about was at the beginning when he talked about, Apple being in education and playgrounds being I just think they really need to make those playgrounds a lot more robust before that can really become a reality. I think there's too many problems with playgrounds right now with sort of unexplained hangs and the tooling there. That's something that really needs to be worked on in order to realize that dream.
With what they've added to the runtime under the playgrounds, it'll be interesting to see how far they have come in the new version.
Yeah, I'm excited to try it out anyway. But so far, it's.
Well, be aware too that what they're talking about, the playgrounds they're talking about for education is the playground on the iPad, the Playgrounds app on the iPad, not the playground in Xcode.
Good point. Good point.
Which, admittedly, I look at some of the plugins for playgrounds and some of the USB, not the USB, some of the Bluetooth devices that the kids can control with it now, and I go back to the Terrapin Turtle and logo. So to have that ability to program and connect with a device to drive it around to begin robotics work, I think what they've done with iPad playgrounds is just astounding. I'm a
big, like, playgrounds for me are the coolest idea ever, but I agree with Ray in that every time I really try and dig into them, I can't do what I want because there's too many crashes or the APIs aren't quite baked or there's always some block. So for me, I'm like, I so want them to live up to their promise because I think it's the coolest technology. It's so fun to just have that live kind of iterative, kind of visceral feedback with programming, which you normally do not get. So I love that.
Not since AppleSoft Basic.
Yeah. But the reality is frustrating oftentimes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if like something more like a Jupyter notebook, which we might see something like that out of the TensorFlows for Swift project.
I saw that too. That was Gallagher, right? Alexis was putting that together.
Yeah.
Well, they've actually the playgrounds in Xcode 10 are Jupyter Notebook-like. They no longer run start to finish as a normal matter of course. You actually, line by line, you press Shift-Enter if you want it to compile that line, or you can push a run button to compile that line. And so, and they did that in part for the same reason that the Jupyter Notebooks are done that way, so that if you have done an operation, a setup operation earlier in the playground, like a massive training, you don't want to rerun that unless you you don't want to automatically rerun that every time you make a change to the playground. So they now are, you press Shift-Enter to run the lines you want to run. It's much more like a Jupyter Notebook in Xcode 10.
Wow.
That sounds great. Like when they mention playgrounds every time, I'm like, okay, I want to see this. Let's like, I always go in thinking, this is going to be awesome now. Right. And so I'm hoping this year, it's like some of these issues have been smoothed out.
I'm still going to skip Richard. I want to throw one or two of my favorite in because I want to leave. I feel Richard seething to say things at this moment. One of the things that I was actually really thrilled at, a lot of the AR kit, seeing more definition of the face sampling, which the tongue is silly, but actually seeing that it's the tongue, more musculature in the face, more musculature of eye motion. And the Memoji does show that there is the ability to go further and put more personalization into what is built, what they're making the Animoji and Memoji out of. There's a lot more control that you are getting. I hate the term for free. And with that in the AR kit, also the shared maps, being able to, at first I thought it was going to, they said 2 people and an observer, but then when they said they had the 4 people in this game, I'm curious to see how far that shared map works, because you get into the potential of a lot of very impressive gaming if you can have 4 people in 4 corners of a room. Again, with the standard AR limitations. For me, a downside, I love playgrounds and I love the iPad playgrounds, but every year I keep hoping that iPad playground will be more integrated into Xcode in a way that I can use my iPad as a secondary development device. If I'm on a plane, it is really easy for me to do some coding on my iPad, especially if it's an iPad with a Bluetooth keyboard, as opposed to pulling out a 13-inch computer or even an Air. And that's something I continually hope that they'll get a closer integration on. Maybe like the Git tools or something, etc. Richard.
For me, the biggie was the significant improvements in the development tools, and the kind of the final wow was the demonstration of the metal debugging tools. But it's not just those; it's the changes to instruments and the rest of it. There was some significant effort, it looked like, at consolidating the gains from last year's complete and total rewrite of Xcode from the ground up in Swift. It'll be good if all of that comes to pass and really works. But that was kind of the big wow. There were other things that other people have mentioned that were also wow-like, but that was the one for me that finally said, okay, this is real. This might actually be fun to work with. I knew you
go for it, Richard. You've been waiting. Go for it.
I knew you were going to go with Memoji as your top one. For me, it's the thing that fell the most flat. It's like, okay, really? And I've already seen.
I'm not saying that Memoji is my favorite. I'm saying that the extension on AR kit.
I understand, and you're exactly right. The technology behind it that makes tongue detection work is great, but. The memes have already started for now. We've had Touch ID, and we've had Face ID, and now we're going to have Tongue ID. Okay, whatever. It was at the point that it occurred in the keynote. It was like, really, I agree with Jake. Really, this is what we're filling this time with. Like, let's do something different, or let's go to lunch. But.
You could actually, all the way back in the earliest Touch ID, add your tongue as a fingerprint.
I didn't know.
Really good.
Total joke.
Is that for real?
That's a joke.
You got me.
I was going to say.
Look, with you guys, it's hard to tell when you guys say you can do X with the technology. The people who follow RayWenderlich.com, they're like, yeah, they said you could do this with the technology, and it's like, oh no, you watch out for these guys.
If you microwave your phone, it'll charge the battery.
I think, Richard, what you're saying with the Memoji stood true was when he stood there on stage last year going, yep, we have made an emoji out of feces. And it was just like, that's where the technology is. That is where my $1,100 phone is going. And again, the thing is, it's that keynote line between what are the kids who are going to consume this think is cool versus what is going to make the people who look at those AR musculatures think, what can I do with this? Because one person's Memoji is another person being able to put together maybe some form of accessibility control system, because you've got somebody with Parkinson's who can only move their eyes very slightly. And all of a sudden, yeah, these ARKit 2 things that are from Memoji become huge.
Yeah, once they expose that API, it's not clear that they've exposed that all to us yet. But
I remember with the ARKit, they exposed all the musculature.
Okay.
So I'm assuming, I know I'm making the assumption, but if they expose the musculature in ARKit, then by adding the new musculature, you're going to have probably an extension to those APIs. But I can look it up and go, oh, no, that's you're not getting the tongue.
Yeah, from last year we got a mask that was then formed based on the expression. So it was like a 3D mesh that would deform, and we had access to that. So you could basically take that 3D mesh and
Right.
But you also had a whole series of things like eye left, eye right, squeeze eye, etc.
And then there was a series of like values that represented deformations. So you could either use the mesh or you could use like the values of this like list of like, I don't know, 40 or 50 things. Anyway, It was cool.
You trigger me now to remember that. Oh, I'm looking in the wrong notes. Why I can't find it. They did mention that there is. They did add more facial landmark stuff. So they must.
Yeah, that was what I caught was that when they showed it, the facial landmarks and a lot more acuity on where the eyes are looking, which is quite astounding. Yeah. I admit, and it's hard for me too, because the emoji, etc., all that technology, it wipes out and fails pretty badly on me because it has difficulty finding my chin. For those watching the podcast, that makes sense, or those who've seen me. I have a beard like Grizzly Adams, so I have lips that float in the middle of this white cloud, and it cannot trace the bottom of my mouth very well at all. So you pretty much have to be clean shaven to use this.
So how many people are looking forward to group FaceTime with 32 people in your FaceTime?
More so than using WebEx.
Well, so that was my question. I'm like, that's cool. We can already do that with, I mean, maybe not 32 people, but we have what we're doing right now. And I'm like, do I need to do that on my phone? I'm like, it's cool. The technology's cool. I don't think
I like how they announced it as something
completely.
I like how they announced it as something completely new, because I remember when iChat had the obsidian table with all the people sitting around the obsidian table with little reflections on it. And I remember when messages came out and multi-eye chat went away very quietly. But 32 it's impressive, and it'll be interesting to see how it handles bandwidth wise. It's probably going to be using the a lot of the newer compression from last year. But it's one of those things that I'd like to stress test at least once to see how it fares, and who knows, maybe we can do one of these things with that technology at some point.
Yeah.
With your own Memoji and see how long your battery lasts.
Yes, that's right, because you can use your own Memoji.
Yeah.
Was that actually Tim, or was that somebody wearing a Tim head?
Oh yeah, that's a good question.
I wasn't sure. I thought it was like, I could have been one of them just saying, I'm playing Tim. I don't know. Mm-hmm. All right. We're coming to the end of this, but any last comments on what people think for the rest of this week, or what people are seeing for the upcoming releases in September? I'll just go straight down the line to put you on the spot. It makes it easier that way. Let's start with you, Ray.
I'm just looking forward to trying out some of this stuff and making some tutorials based on the new Create ML and that. And I'll be in San Jose at Try Swift at the end of the week if anyone's there. Come by.
Awesome.
Say hi.
And Ray, one last question for you. Have you installed anything from Beta 1, or are you planning on installing anything from Beta 1?
I will, but not on my carry phone.
Okay.
And obviously Xcode 10, which is quite exciting.
Andy.
I think we're going to be seeing Xcode dark theme in a lot of sessions this week, and it's only going to make me more and more excited for when that'll be released and when I can actually use it on my corporate computer. and I have not installed any betas yet. I may, and I won't on my carry phone, but I may install iOS 12 on my iPad.
Jake?
Yeah, I'm excited about some of the ARKit sessions. I'm thinking that there's probably some details that they weren't able to share that'll get me kind of pumped. So there's a ton of them. So I think I'm gonna kind of dive deep into that this week. I am gonna install. I haven't yet, but I'm gonna install 12 on my iPad here probably tonight. So,
Richard?
I'm actually looking forward to the What's New sessions because they always seem to manage to bury some little interesting nugget in one of them. And so I'm wondering what that nugget's going to be this year. So I'm looking forward to those because those are always kind of the fluff. You think of them as the fluff throwaway, but you have to watch them. But there's always something useful in there. I've got Xcode 10 running next to 9.4 at the moment. I absolutely will not install 12 on my carry phone or my active iPad, but I have development phones and a development iPad that will eventually get it, just not this week.
And I'm assuming Xcode 10 is running on High Sierra.
It is running on High Sierra, yes, because I cannot put Mojave on my machine at the moment.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to the What's New sessions. I'm going to look at some of the AR session, even though it's very far from what I do. I actually every now and then I get rekindled to look at Mac stuff when they introduce some of the things, and I'll admit it. And for those who are watching video, I've installed 12 on my carry phone because I'm insane, and I've already filed a radar because my hair color and my facial hair color are not the same. And that's something you can't do. I did discover one thing that they haven't talked about in the iPhone 10. If you want to quit an app under iOS 11, you have to long press on it to get a minus symbol to kill it. If you just toss it away, you don't actually kill the app. It's still running. And in iOS 12, they've actually changed that back to the behavior you'd expect off of something like the iPad, where if you sweep away an app in the app pager, the app does in fact get killed for a rerun.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
good.
like that.
That was
feature.
my pet peeve when I got my 10. Was that exact thing? I'm like,
Amen.
So yeah, I mean, I took the risk. I went back and forth and I said, am I going to put this on my carry 12? And I'm going to, but then again, I'm also somebody who will file some of the most annoying radars. They still haven't fixed a 10.5 bug of mine that I've been joking with them for years. I write poetry in my radar update saying, no, you still haven't fixed this. I actually had somebody at WWDC come up to me going, oh yeah, we know that bug. We're never going to fix it. But to explain, I was living in St. Louis for a while, and at some point they changed the date control panel so that if you said that you were the city you were in, rather than having it automatically figure out what time zone you were in, at some point it stopped letting you type in St. Louis and would always change it to Stockholm. As you were typing, the word would change to Stockholm. We refer to it as the Stockholm Syndrome bug. You could not, in fact, type St. Louis in as your city. And it worked in 10.4, it broke in 10.5, and ever since then, every beta I check it, and I send them a message going, come on, aren't you going to fix this? And no, I was told, no, we're not going to fix that. So, everybody, I want to thank you all for your time. We don't do things like this very often, and it was a little bit makeshift at points, but I think we got a lot of information. And I really, you are some of the guys who, you are some of the people who are going to be talking about this, writing about it, figuring out what stuff are going to be on the site. And obviously, once we get the podcast episode, we can get some feedback so people can say, I'm interested in this, not interested in this. And it was really good having you all here today. So, gentlemen, and of course, Jay, thank you so much.
It was great to be here.
Yeah.
And to Andrew, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And all the
Very
people who
excited.
came out to watch us do this live, thank you all to those of you who are watching. A couple of weeks to edit this together, and we do have a new episode of the podcast coming out in next Monday, actually, is it? I think. Is the first episode of the season, or is it the Monday after? I've checked my schedule, but the first episode we're going to actually be talking about, it's a full immersive episode talking about Kotlin, talking about how Kotlin is different than Swift, talking about how Kotlin is growing and how Kotlin is changing because we are adopting Android technologies. I realize most of the people listening today are iOS or Mac OS or Apple technologies, but we are taking a look into all of that stuff. And we appreciate the people who are listening in. Again, if you want to give a like on this episode, we'll probably do more of them in the future. Again, for the Ray Wenderlich website, for the raywenderlich.com tutorials and the staff and the podcast, thank you all, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye.